That's how it came from Lago.
Hey, Josh.
Oh, no.
What kind of nonsense is that, man?
I don't use this either.
Dave, we ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Notice is hereby given that the Lago Vista City Council is holding a regular meeting on Thursday, January 3rd, 2019, beginning at 6:32 p.m. in the City Council chambers at City Hall, 5803 Thunderbird, Lago Vista, Texas, as prescribed by VTCA Government Code Section 551.041, to consider the following agenda items. Items do not have to be taken in the same order as shown in the meeting notice. Sandra, please note that we have all of our city council members present tonight. We have our city manager, Josh Ray. We have yourself, Danny Smith, our police chief, Aaron Salvetta, city attorney, Dave Street with IT. Back in the back, we have Eric Belay, our engineer, Roy Jambor with Development Services, and Star Lockwood with Financial. Anybody I'm missing? Okay, if you would, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll pledge the American flag first. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now the Texas flag.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you.
You got it right.
Citizen comments. In accordance with the Open Meetings Act, council is prohibited from acting or discussing, other than factual responses to specific questions, any items not on the agenda. I have no one signed up. So is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the council with a comment? All right, seeing none, we will move to items of community interest. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.0415, the City Council may report on any of the following items. A, expressions of thanks, gratitude, and condolences. B, information regarding holiday schedules. C, recognition of individuals, i.e. proclamations. D, reminders regarding City Council events. E, reminders regarding community events. F, health and safety announcements. And I can't think of anything other than Happy New Year. We have no holidays coming up. When is our appreciation dinner?
January the 10th.
We do have our appreciation dinner coming up on January 10th. That's all I have. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Mayor, I have one thing.
Arch?
I would like to announce the fact that our subcommittee for scenic cities is underway. We got started with our first meeting yesterday, and so we're looking forward to getting that certification underway here pretty soon.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, next week we begin our first meeting on Lago Fest to try to get, if anyone wants to volunteer to be on part of the Lago Fest committee, contact Meredith Kuntz here at City Hall, and we'd be more than happy to get you involved. But we're starting that process now. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Anything else? All right, we will move into presentation. Agenda item number 1, presentation from, is it TAS United or TAS United? All right, I'll introduce you real quick. Here, let me scroll to my thing here. Thank you. This is not going to the right place.
Thank you.
Okay. Excuse me, hold on just a second, Dan. Sure. There we go. Okay. So tonight we have with us with Tash United, Dan Kilday. Similar to what we did a month or so ago, I brought in someone that's representing something of community interest, possible council interest. You know, we go to these TML conferences and stuff, and we see things as council members, but staff and public does not necessarily see these things. And as I come across things that I think may be of interest or assistance to the city, I will ask them to come and present their stuff, just so, you know, not that I'm advocating anything, but just so that everybody can see these things and have it in their mind when it comes to developing the future of Lago Vista. So again, I have Mr. Dan Kilday with Tash United.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, Mayor Tidwell, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for your time. I promise to keep my 3-hour presentation as brief as I can. I'm just kidding. I have with me Mr. Kevin Ryan. He's our managing partner at Tash United, and we're very happy to be here with you. We just wanted to talk to you about 311 service and how it can benefit your community and abroad. We are experts in the field and certainly have many cities across the state of Texas that are using this service, and we wanted to present that to you as well. So what is 311? 311 is sort of a way to get information out to your community. It's a way to access non-emergency municipal services. Actually started in the mid-90s and was started actually in Baltimore, Maryland. They actually had a marketing slogan back then to kind of let people know what it was about that said, burning buildings, dial 911. Burning questions, dial 311. That was their marketing slogan. So that was sort of the idea, was to get the if you needed to get some information, you can dial 311 and that service would be available to you. As time has gone on, it has sort of morphed into a way for you to actually alert citizens of things that are going on in your community. It's a way for people to find out what's going on, and that's what we want to talk to you a little bit about today. Tash United, which is our company, has been around for over 30 years. We are all over the state of Texas. We're headquartered in San Antonio, but we have additional offices in Houston, Beaumont, Lubbock. We have a data collection facility here in Austin, or nearby in Austin. So we're all over the state, and we've been doing this for quite a while. All of our calls and messages are recorded and archived. You will have access to that information at any time whenever you need it. Our web portal is very handy to access and see the messages and see the data that has been collected. And that's very important for reporting access to you as well. And like I said, our technology is housed in a Tier 4 data center here in Austin. It's highly secure. And service and support is available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So what I did was I went through and took a look at some of the 311 calls that we are currently answering and kind of took a list of some of the most common calls that come through just to give you an idea of what 311 can be used for. I start with public health questions. So let's say there's a flu outbreak or it's just flu season in general. Many people will call 311 to ask about where they can go to get a flu shot. Things of that nature would be a public health question. Those are quite common. Water lines. This is one of the most common calls that come in. There's flooding down our street right now because of a water main break or something along those lines. Maybe a hydrant is opened up that needs to be closed. Things like that. You can call 311 and just alert the city that this needs to be taken care of. Gas and electric management, very similar. There's a strong odor of gas in the area. Can you please send somebody to come take a look at it? Or our electricity went out. Things like that can be used. Traffic lights. The light at the corner of Smith and Jones is not working and it's causing a lot of traffic issues. Street lights. It's very actually different than traffic lights. Those are the lights that illuminate the streets. Sometimes those will go out and we'll get calls about that as well. Billing questions. Now people, if they are on your water service, they'll call in with billing questions. Where do I pay my bill? How do I pay my bill? What is this on my bill? Things like that we can take care of as well. Park district. This could be anything from hey, we'd like to rent out the pavilion area for a party, to the playground needs to be repaired, to there's a suspicious individual down here that needs to be, can somebody come check this out? We can take those calls as well. The housing authority, perhaps the city housing authority subsidizes the rent for low-income tenants. We'll get calls about the application process for things like that, or just rent questions in general, things like that. Animal control, somebody sees a pet with no collar wandering around, or if somebody sees a wild animal where it doesn't belong, or a dead animal on the side of the road, 311 can be a valuable resource for reporting things like that. Municipal court questions, in other words, how do I pay my traffic ticket? Where do I go for my court date? When is my court date? Questions like that will come in on 311. Alarm monitoring. Somebody's house alarm is triggered, it sends a signal. We can monitor those alarms and report the alarm to the proper channels when those things come in. When registering a new alarm system, you would, call in to register that as well. Down trees, that one's pretty self-explanatory. Environmental hazard, I see somebody dumping chemicals into a storm drain, or I notice a leak at the gas station. I see a truck hauling chemicals that's leaking onto the road, things like that. Social services, we'll sometimes get calls from homeless people that are asking for information for where to seek shelter, or following a disaster or emergency, we'll sometimes get social services calls. The electricity is out. A noise complaint. I had to do this on New Year's Eve. Call on your neighbors if they're firing fireworks at 2:30 in the morning. We can certainly take those calls and dispatch it to the right people. Plumbing problems. This would be somebody in the city who's on the city water, whose water is out, or maybe they're not getting hot water and they need to let somebody know about that. Road debris. Please have somebody come down to the corner of 5th to remove these big crates that fell off of somebody's truck. And finally, solid waste questions. What day do I need to put my recycling out? When is large brush pickup? Things like that. Those questions can be answered with 311. So like I said, these are just some examples of the types of questions that we get that come in on our lines. It could be well and beyond that, but I just wanted to kind of give you kind of a rundown of some of the calls. So, yes, sir.
Work orders. Can you handle work orders? Say if somebody comes in and says they need something done in their neighborhood? Is that something that...
Certainly, depending on what it is, if we have a protocol in place that we can dispatch that to the proper channels, and certainly if somebody's calling in about those, we can certainly take those. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, sir. So some of the benefits of our company in particular, the main one being cost. You're not paying to hire a staff and buy the equipment to operate this 24/7 yourself. You've got somebody that can do it for you just as well at a small fraction of the cost that it would cost the city to do yourself here in-house. We can customize this to your city's needs, meaning you are dictating back to us exactly how you want things to be handled. If you went through another municipality, you would not have that luxury. They would not be able to be as flexible with the things that you need us to do. The detailed reporting is actually a very important step here, because you can look at the reporting, the calls that are coming in, the types of calls that are coming in, the location of those calls, and maybe figure things out. You've gotten 3 water main breaks in the same location. Maybe there's a problem in that area that we need to look into. I mentioned Baltimore earlier. They were using it to, with rat infestations. They would hear these complaints and discover that there was actually a real issue in that part of town, and they had the reporting to see that with the calls that were coming in. Our messaging platform can track the types of calls that are coming in and show you what's going on in your city and where it's located. And then we are an experienced 311 provider, meaning we have the know-how to assist you in setting this all up. We have the templates in place from other cities that we work with. So we know what to expect and can kind of guide you through that process. I put elastic on here. That just means that, let's say there's a big holiday event that comes up, or there's an election or something like that that's happening. We have the bandwidth to support a large influx of calls, so we can stretch to meet your needs if there's a big thing. When I was here in October to meet with Mayor Tidwell, the Austin water crisis was going on that time. And as I'm sitting here in the lobby, I think she answered probably 15 calls about whether or not your water was safe to drink. And, of course, she said, yes, it is. It's safe to drink. You don't have to worry about that. But, I mean, things like that come up unexpectedly, we have the staff to handle a sudden influx of calls, and those are calls that we could certainly address with a 311 service. And then the custom greeting. So this is another thing that could help in that situation. You could have a front-end greeting, which is sort of a quick automated message when you dial 311 that says, "Thank you for calling Lago Vista 311 services. We understand that there is a water situation in Austin. That's not happening here. The water is safe to drink. And if you're calling about that, just know that the water is safe to drink. If you're calling for another reason, please press 1." And then those other calls can come in through. But we're addressing an issue up front with a greeting, which actually limits the amount of calls that are coming through to us that can, keep your bill manageable. So a custom greeting could be used for a variety of things. If there's a holiday event that's going on, things like that you could actually put in the greeting to let people know. And then that's it. That's all I have. If you guys have any questions, we'd be happy to address those.
Question.
Yes, sir.
So how do you designate our area as 311? For example, Lago Vista. However, 3 miles down the road, I have Point Venture. 3 miles down the road this way, I have Jonestown. And then I'm surrounded by county residents. None of these 4 entities have access to 311. Okay? However, everybody else, when they call 311, they're going to get Austin. How do we know that people in this area, this region, when they call 311, they're going to get Lago Vista?
Kevin, you want to
I can
address
address
that?
that. The technology works through the
Please.
technology works through the central offices, and the central office actually codes the 311 so that when those communities dial 311, the calls get redirected to our center. So in the case of these surrounding communities, we would actually know that the calls are coming from them. And then we address identification related questions.
Question, a lot of phones are cells without an area. Mine's Dallas. How do you know I'm calling from?
Well, in that case, we'd actually have to ask those questions. What are you calling about? What is this related to? I live in Lago Vista.
Okay. I got a question for Danny. How many of these calls do you get now?
Sir, we field all of these calls presently in that capacity. And, our issue is educating the public as far as the 911 calls go. We don't dispatch for fire and EMS. That's why when they'll call our admin lines. Because we routinely answer all of these questions on a daily basis, 24/7, 365 days a year. But we're police primarily, but, we do assist with their communications calls, but they get routed, all fire and EMS calls get routed to the county. And you have somebody downtown at SeaTac that's actually doing the calls. Now, I've spoken with the fire chief, and he's indicated to us he'd very much like to transfer the dispatching services to us, and I'm in total agreement with it. We'll know where it is before anybody knows where it is, and therefore be able to capture and send the help to them quicker. But the problem that I see with a lot of this is, like right now, somebody calls and says somebody's having a heart attack on the 7th hole of the Lago Vista golf course. Well, no one in that SeaTac center knows where that's at. Right. But our local people can say, okay, we need to dispatch people over to Rockwood or, that general vicinity, because that's where the 7th hole is located. But it's that personal knowledge that I prefer of our community versus somebody dispatching from afar that has no knowledge of our town or different locations and areas, buildings and whatnot.
I've had to call on a 911 on a cell phone and tell them which department I want.
Yes, sir.
All right.
When we get that, quite a bit, we get a call transferred to us from the county, or somebody lives out in the county, and the first thing our dispatchers will have to do is say, what's your address? And of course, again, that's where the relevance of them having personal knowledge right in, because they know where they're at. So somebody from Austin might not understand that or realize that.
And your 311 calls are then forwarded to an appropriate.
Yes, on emergency calls, the directive is for us to forward the calls over to the emergency dispatch center.
The gas leak would go where?
Gas leak would go to the appropriate entity that deals with gas leaks. We would follow protocols just as are dictated and set up right now.
Well, just to give you an example, we had, a few days ago, we had a citizen call in a strong odor of fuel. So our folks immediately dispatched our fire department, even though they don't technically dispatch for them, we directly contacted them and then had our people en route to those locations to help, look for the sources of the fuel smell. But again, these are calls that our people field every day.
So I mean, I can see some value of this for putting it to City Hall and other places, but I see a difficulty with an emergency type situation.
Yeah, emergency protocols always go to the emergency center.
Get
These,
somebody trained to call 311.
yeah, these are the calls that as communities are growing out, as we've seen in the other areas that we provide these services to, we're filtering out all the non-emergency calls because the 911 aspect becomes overloaded with too much traffic that is not emergency. And they can get completely bogged down to where the 911 services that are supposed to get dispatched in a timely manner are not done so because of non-emergency traffic. And certain things, we do a lot of the coastal community. And when Harvey came in a year ago, the city of Orange, the city of Port Arthur, literally lost all of their city infrastructure. And we processed all of those calls for almost 4 months. Literally every call to the city for almost a 4-month period, we processed all of them until they could get operationally back in place. So it's for the everyday things that take place, but it's also for the catastrophic things that may take place that we're this facility that can continue to help and assist. And some of your points are well made, sir, which is our agents will not have the community knowledge that you have here, but what we do is we have very sophisticated if-then logic, which can drill in, and we have maps that can come up in front of our agents. So we can do some things related to that, which is when someone gives us an address, a map will pop up on a second screen in front of an agent and it'll pinpoint that exact location. So even if we're relaying information to somebody, we could say, hey, it's at such and such a spot. So the technology gets better and better about that all the time. And certain things like your fests that you talked about, when those come up and lots of call traffic gets related to that. I'm a vendor, I want to do this, or how do I get it? What are the dates? What are the times? As that traffic is coming in, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're processing it for you.
Tim, what I wanted to point out, so this is not 911. This is not emergency. This is information only. So right now, the way we operate,
Everybody gets.
Donna and Ally pretty much field every single call.
Right.
Up until 6 p.m. Then they transfer their calls over to the to the police station, and the dispatcher has to field all these calls.
Right.
And, 99% of the time, it's a non-emergency, but a police dispatcher is not gonna know the questions to when's my trash day per se, or,
Pick up debris.
things like that. So it's for the day-to-day routine information calls, but what did we just have here in October?
Yeah.
A
I don't know
flood.
how much relief would be taken off of the police department.
Well, you talk to the people who were flooded in October,
Yeah.
we had no access to 311 whatsoever. We were having to literally direct people to call 911 because we didn't have a 311 service. Well, 911 in Austin, C-Tech, was very upset that we were sending non-emergency phone calls to their call center, but we had no option. So, this is something that would, make it focused on Lago Vista area. You know, all of our information, all of our stuff, you're not having to call Austin, you're not having to go through
Right.
places like that. It's all Lago. And I questioned, you know, about the region, okay? How you designate it. Now, if we were to sign up for the 311 services, would that exclude our neighboring communities?
It would be all dependent on how you want to set it up. One of the things I can tell you, though, when it comes to budgeting for this, is.
Oh, I'd definitely approach them.
Yeah, well, we can segment that out. They're called sub-accounts. So literally, the calls that come in from these different communities, we would be categorizing them and keeping the data of that. So at the end of the month, we'd say, here's the amount of calls for Jonestown, here's the amount of calls for Lago Vista, here's the amount of time that we were spent on each one of them. So from a billing and budgetary perspective, they could be outsourced back to those, which is here's your cost, here's our cost, here's their cost.
Because the day-to-day things probably wouldn't be a factor, but if we have an emergency like with the flooding,
Right.
people from the county or from Point Venture or Jonestown may be calling 311, and I don't want them to be excluded necessarily from being able to access information.
No,
Just because.
we could set it up any way you'd like to. Yeah.
Another example would be like coming into Lago Vista, you come in on 1431. So a lot of times there's an accident on 1431. You're not in Lago Vista, but you're on 1431 coming up here.
Right.
And, you know, to alert people that there was an accident on 1431 would be
You're not gonna get here.
an added plus. You know,
Yeah.
like I'm at Nameless and have to go through the county for that? Okay.
Well, it depends on how they're making their phone call. If they're calling in to report an accident, they're probably gonna be calling 911.
Right.
You know, so just getting that information over to a different parallel, you know, a supporting system like 311.
Yeah, would you guys be able
You'd
to
have
have
to-
alternate routes?
It does go back to what Dan was talking about earlier, where we can put these front-end announcements on. So when there is some type of an event, which you know is going to, or it takes place, and then we know it's going to be a lot of consistent call traffic, we can put that on the front end, which is, thank you for calling Lago Vista 311 services. At this time, there is a significant accident on 1431, which is shut down the road. Please use alternate routes
Right.
A, B, and C.
Gotcha.
If you need other services, please press 1 or simply stay on the line and you'll be connected to an agent who can assist you.
Gotcha.
I have a couple of questions.
Dick?
First off, you're available 24 hours a day. You get that call, tree limb has fallen in the road. There's water coming down the street. How do you relate that information to the city if there's not anybody available at that time to deal with those issues? Do you send that to the police department or?
Well, how do you, I guess my question back to you, sir, would, how do you guys handle down powered lines in the middle of the night?
It's all routed to the PD, and
It's right there.
we go straight to PEC, so it'd be kind of redundant to have somebody calling us.
Yeah, so
To
we
have
would,
us call, you
we
know.
would go straight to PEC.
Okay.
The protocol would dictate that this is what we're supposed to do with those kind of calls.
Okay, what I hear you saying is this is a tremendous amount of information that you're trying to disseminate to people. What, if we decided to put this in, what are we talking about as far as a startup time to get that information set up so that we can start using the service?
Well, the general startup time would probably be in the neighborhood of about 2 weeks.
Okay,
See, most of the templates we already have in place. I mean, the down power lines, the barking dogs, these are templates that we already have created. What we do is we customize and we fill in the specifics that your community would want us to have related to those. No, we don't want you guys to do this with a barking dog. We want you to do this with a barking dog.
okay.
So those are the changes we would make.
Okay, and then you said that you were one of the least expensive 311 services. Can you give us a ballpark of what we're talking about as far as money?
We bill based on time. So the only time you're getting billed for your calls is when you're actually talking to a live agent. So those announcements, for example, that we've talked about, those are non-billable times. That's just the part of the services that are offered. So when you're on the time, you're billed in 6-second increments as well. So depending on the length of the call, it's not rounded up to a minute. It's every 6 seconds is a billable frame. So for this type of a community, your services would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of between $500 to $1,500 a month. And I'm giving you that range because it's a little bit elastic. There's certain months you're going to have more call traffic than others. But in general, I'd say it's probably somewhere in there.
Would you repeat that figure again?
500 to 1,500, and these are approximations because I don't have your existing call traffic.
Right.
I could get it probably fairly quickly, but
That would be the person right there, probably.
yeah. So, and your internal staff will still take some of these calls during the day. We're not replacing internal staff. We're supplementing internal staff. Okay, there's an ice storm and your internal staff cannot get in to take those calls. We handle those calls. But otherwise, the call traffic that is normally being processed here is being processed. It's the after-hours stuff and the Saturdays and the Sundays and the holidays when people are still needing these services that we help the community significantly.
What other communities do you serve in our immediate area?
Actually, in the immediate area, we don't have any other cities right now. All of our, this has all been built out primarily from the coast over towards San Antonio. So we have communities all up and down the coast, and then we have communities that come on in over towards San Antonio. So Lago Vista within Central Texas would be the first client we have.
Okay.
We've been supplying services to cities for probably 5 years. It started with water districts, which is, hey, there's a lift station that's not working. There's some water that's not working, those types of things. And then 311 has evolved throughout communities in the state of Texas. Those communities that were already using us for those types of calls said, hey, could you do this 311 stuff for us? And we've evolved in that regard.
Yes, sir. I asked that question basically because I wanted to see if there was any way to compare costs with a city the size of our city, which is roughly 7,000 residents.
Dan can, and we can send some follow-up information that can get disseminated out to all of you, especially if I could get some additional call traffic numbers. We'd be able to give you a more specific figure that's much closer to home plate as far as cost goes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So Travis County is consumed pretty much by Austin 311. We just happen to be the redheaded stepchild out here on the lake. Do you know if any of the other communities such as Cedar Park, Leander, Round Rock, Georgetown, do they have a 311 system that they use?
That would be better. Yeah.
Not to my knowledge. I've been speaking to some of them, up to this point, but to my knowledge, no. I could look into that a little bit further. But Leander was one of the cities that was interested in this service as well, so I know for a fact they don't. Cedar Park was another one, yeah. So those specific ones, no.
Gotcha.
Gentlemen?
I'm good.
All right, I guess we are done. Thank you all
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you're leaving us, be careful driving home at this time. We have lots of deer in our area, so.
55 and it's a nice drive.
All right, so we shall move to public hearings. Item number 2, Lago Vista City Council is holding a public hearing to discuss a potential ordinance amending various sections of Chapter 3, Building Regulations, and Chapter 14, the zoning ordinance, to consolidate all substantive requirements related to the exterior appearance of principal buildings in Chapter 3, including proposed new language and replacing them with references only in Chapter 14. And I will open the public hearing at 7:06 PM. What?
I will do my best to be brief because this is a fairly comprehensive bit of work. I guess the most significant thing about it that I'd like to call to your attention is it was the first collaborative effort between the subcommittee that was established as part of the building committee and part of planning and zoning, where we were able to then have a retreat sort of meeting so that we could hammer out the approach before I started writing ordinance language at random and hoping it was correct. I was provided with the benefit of just listening to a couple of 3 hours of conversation between these members. So I had a pretty good idea of where to go, and those provisions were later taken back to the individual full bodies of those boards to go over it in detail. And what you have is an issue that has come up. Once again, it's been a priority, primarily for two reasons. One is that these were provisions that were duplicated in both Chapter 3 and 14. And as you're well aware, we're trying to make the end result of our ordinance to eliminate the redundancy and make it a little more coherent, make it a little more user-friendly, where it's logical, people can find where the provisions are. When we get it online and in real time, up to date instantly, we will hopefully have a product where we don't have to answer these questions over the phone, but people can really have a realistic ability to discover the answers themselves. That's kind of what our long-term goal is. The second aspect of this was to eliminate some existing ambiguity and lack of precision in those ordinances. There was even a different approach when you compared residential buildings to non-residential buildings in terms of the approach. For example, in residential buildings, there was a requirement that there be 25% masonry without ever bothering to define that term or even how you calculate the area, where it goes, and the location. Whereas on non-residential buildings, it was very specific. It was, all three sides except for the rear. But once again, they didn't use terms like masonry. They gave you the materials that said, a certain percentage of it had to be these materials. So we kind of modeled our approach, if you will, after that, sort of specificity. And we came up with an approach that basically said we're going to have something called define a required material, and you've got to have a certain percentage of the required material. We tell you where it's got to be. We have then allowable materials that are allowed to make up the balance. And then the third category is we're not going to prohibit the following materials, except in specific locations. And once again, the thought was that the exterior appearance of buildings being predominantly as an aesthetic issue should be in Chapter 3. And therefore, what we did was consolidate these requirements in Chapter 3 and simply replace them with references in the zoning ordinance and say, hey, if you want to know what materials you're supposed to use in this district, go look at this section of the ordinance. And that's kind of the approach. I think the highlights might be that one of the common complaints we get is that you have, particularly in Lago Vista, where you have, severely severe terrain, you have these large expanses of exposed concrete foundations that have no finished materials. This ordinance will prohibit that going forward, that, the exposed concrete will be limited to 24 inches of grade. Conversely, the existing ordinance, at least it's not real clear, but one of the things that is reasonably clear is that the only thing that's excluded from the various calculations are roof materials and windows and other openings. We said, well, anything above the top plate, i.e. that is the siding or the finished material on an attic, would not have to be, part of that calculations. So there was a little bit of a trade-off, if you will. There's now basically the idea that the required materials, or at least the analysis of the exterior materials, even on a residence, will include basically everything except that which you can't see from a rear yard.
Right.
If you can see it, by God, it's part of the calculations. Now, the total numbers, one of the things that happened was, as we looked at some of the areas around here, specifically Lakeway, their requirement was a 65% of a required material, if you will. That was so close to the 75% we used on non-residential buildings. We had a little bit trouble justifying the minor difference between the two. So one of the things we did was reduce the required percentage on non-residential buildings and made them match. But the idea is that you guys are ultimately will be the decider of exactly what is the right number. We'll leave that up to your discretion. From the staff and the committee's perspective, it was simply to get the ambiguity out of the ordinance and get something that everybody knew exactly what the requirements were.
So for residential, how did we come up with the number of 65%?
We started with it. That was what I think it came from the Lakeway ordinance, but they're typically in the area, it was a higher number than what we were using previously. If you guys were to decide that's too high, we're okay with that. It works just as easily. It's fairly easy for you guys to change those numbers if you think that. One of the discussions that happened that occurred during the lengthy discussions between both the committees and the full bodies was that the primary determinant of cost, if affordability is really a concern, is not the exterior finished materials on a building. It has to do with the size of the building. That if you wanted to substantially impact cost, you would look at reducing the minimum required size. And maybe one of the offshoots of this will be that when we start looking at the various individual zoning districts, that you come up with a zoning district where you relax these standards, both in terms of size and the material requirements, and have one that, is more affordable, if you will, and is not the mobile home district. So that was part of the discussion, is that, maybe this does stimulate the need for that. But once again, the primary determinant of building cost is more the size and the interior finishes as opposed to the exterior finishes. Those are factors that are infinitely more significant than the exterior.
Roy, correct me if I'm wrong, the multifamily and the non-residential facilities were already at 75%.
That is correct.
So putting...
Only real change we made there was to, once again, we got a little more specific in the materials. There was a little bit of vague language in there in terms of, it said you can't use this. Well, what did it mean? Did you mean you can't use this at all? Or you can't use this as a required material to make up the percentage? We cleaned that up. We also made it clear that, what we were really concerned with was not necessarily the rear of the building, but how close it was to a public right-of-way or a golf course. Those were the, if you were right up against a public right-of-way or a golf course, the idea is, no, we don't really want to see something that's much lower in standard and quality and durability than the rest of the building.
But I also think this brings uniformity between a single-family home, a one-story home, a two-story home, a multifamily, and a non-residential.
It is, and once again, the idea is if this is too onerous a requirement, that maybe a zoning district with relaxed standards is in order. But once again, the exact percentage, the idea is you guys can adjust that on the fly fairly easily. We did not spend a lot of time debating what the exact number should be. The idea was to leave that to the discretion of the council.
But the main purpose of this, Roy, is to bring 3 and 14 basically into compliance with each other, so that we remove some of that.
The redundancy.
Well, I'm doing this according to 14. I'm not doing this according to 3. so that it basically says the same thing.
Right, and if you go to 14 and you're looking in each zoning district, it'll reference you to the correct sections of 3 to look at, to find out what the exterior material requirements are. And that way, if you amend one, you don't have to amend it twice.
Amend the other.
You know, eliminates mistakes, confusions, you know, and we've got a lot of that, and we'll clean them up over time. But this was considered to be one of the things that needed to be addressed. And I'll give you a perfect example. It wasn't that long ago that this council addressed the similarity restrictions. Well, that was put in Chapter 14. It's now moved into 3 with a reference in 14 to go look at 3 for that. Once again, that's something that's keep all the exterior appearance requirements in the same place. And we will approach, you know, and you're about to start dealing with some nuisance issues. We will make the same recommendation. There are nuisance ordinances in about 3 or 4 different places, in 3 or 4 different chapters. One of the things we'll recommend is putting those in one place.
But this would limit us on creativity as far as our homes go. Like I could not build a log cabin. I couldn't come in and build a nice container home. I couldn't build a southern antebellum type house. Or
the container homes, of course, that you've already addressed, you know, in terms of you know, the what's called the industrialized housing, and where those are limited to, except if you can, you know, justify the state required cost or appraised value limitations. But in terms of materials, I mean, you can't build a log cabin now unless it's 25% masonry. You follow me? So nothing's really changed there. Now, I'll tell you this, because it's in the zoning ordinance right now, it would be difficult for you to get a variance from that, because the standard would be hardship. Being in Chapter 3, you have a much better chance, you know, because all you're required there, in my opinion, is to meet an equivalency standard, i.e. it's just as safe and just as high quality as what your ordinance requires. It's simply different. And that would then go in front of right now, still the Building Committee, but maybe a little later tonight, the Building and Standards Commission. That, you follow me? Right. That was one of the things. Right now, because it's in 14, it's in both places, I don't know what you would do with it, but under the current ordinance, those would both go to the Board of Adjustments, the way it is today. And the standard for there is a physical hardship. So I would say you can't build a log cabin in Lago Vista today, except in the zoning ordinances where those restrictions don't exist.
I'm looking at this, we're looking at 160% increase in the amount of masonry that is now going to be required on a residential.
Well, and once again, we've avoided using that term, and now what we have is required materials, which includes, you know, stucco or exterior plaster. And it's made clear that that's one of the materials that's allowed, as well as a wealth of other materials. That basically, you know, the idea is, you know, once again, if you were to read between the lines, if you will, the motive behind masonry or masonry-like products is to provide a certain amount of low-maintenance materials that are extremely durable without maintenance. So anything that met that category is on that list.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Municipal facilities, page 40. Could you mention that?
Yes, sir. One of the things, and it wasn't a primary motive behind this, but thank goodness Mr. Robbins reminded me. But what happens is, as you guys know, I typically include an entire section. And we ask the members when they see something that's dated or perhaps erroneous to call it to our attention so we can fix it. One of the things that was mentioned to us was a dated version of references about what kind of, you know, requirements there were for sewage and that sort of thing. I corrected it in a manner that I'll have to admit my non-Texas background caused me to treat everything is either a public municipal system or a private municipal system. Because in other states, they basically, all the private systems, whether they're all licensed. But in Texas, you have things that are kind of a little bit of both, MUDs as well as special utility districts. And the wording I use that's in your packet right now is not actually accurate. And we got with Mr. Robbins and we fixed that language and submitted it. It will be 2 weeks from now, you'll have the corrected version of that. So you'll see there are other miscellaneous corrections we make just as we see them, even though that's not the primary gist of this ordinance. And we are thankful when everybody points that out to us, because when you're writing about one topic, you don't scrutinize that stuff very carefully. And I was guilty of that in this case. The next two are much shorter, if that helps. But, for what it's worth, it was very effective to work with, even, aside from the repetitive or redundant nature of these requirements and eliminating that redundancy. It was an extremely effective way to work with those little joint subcommittees.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't use that for anything that's that long and comprehensive, just because it's that more efficient to write them that way. As long as those gentlemen are willing to put the time in, it certainly is helpful.
Yeah, I think the subcommittees did a great job.
And I would add that it is a really good model going forward to use different subcommittees. That if they're attacking the same issue, why not?
In previous months, this might have taken 5 or 6 meetings in front of P&Z to vet this same material.
So what are our communities to our east and west? What are their standards? Like Cedar Park, Leander, Round Rock, Georgetown, Marble Falls, what are their percentage requirements?
Not all of those have percentage requirements, but like I said, the community that was recommended as being, a lakefront community was Lakeway. And they did have a district where that didn't apply, and so do we. But in our case, the district where it doesn't apply is the manufactured home district.
I'm trying to figure out why I want to look like Lakeway.
I understand.
My question would be, why wouldn't you?
Because we're Lago Vista, we're not Lakeway.
We're on the lake. We're on the lake.
You
Yeah.
seen the T-shirts, "Don't Lakeway my Lago"?
No.
They're out there.
I understand. And
Wouldn't
once
have any-
again,
I mean,
if somebody, you have houses that are 100% stucco now, I mean, that would still be
And that
fine.
still would be available to do.
Yeah.
The big change, and this is one that we get quite a bit of, and I don't know if you guys hear it as much as well, is we've got in front of the Board of Adjustment next week, a person who wants to build an extra tall fence to block the unsightly view of a 9-foot concrete wall that they would be staring at out of their backyard, the edge of somebody else's foundation. And once again, the idea that you finish that, if that's a fairly high percentage, if you will, on some of these lots of the, exterior finish materials. If you required, 25% and said, yeah, I do want you to include that in the calculations, in some cases, you wouldn't even hit the finished floor. You wouldn't even cover all the concrete.
I look at some of these house plans out there in southern living and coastal living, and they have some of these beautiful southern style homes, 0% required material. They're all siding and wood and cedar shake, and they're beautiful homes. But yet I'm going to tell somebody they can't build that home
I understand.
in this community.
Well, and I'll give you an
because-
example. It's very uncommon, okay, for communities to have to write an ordinance that prohibits people from building large metal buildings in residential neighborhoods, but you do here. because they will build them otherwise. Typically, there are people that are much more concerned about the resale value of their houses and won't do that because of the negative impact on that. We see metal buildings in other communities in extremely rural areas where, people own 5 acres. I've never seen a community where, people would go into a high end. And the other thing is that in a lot of those communities, you'll have deed restriction covenants that are more actively enforced and enforceable. And I'm not so sure that's the case here.
Roy, I'd like to ask you a question. Is there any, in the materials that are prohibited, is wood one of those materials that's prohibited? So if I wanted to build an antebellum home, and those people that know me know that I've owned 2 Victorian homes that were principally all wood, I could do that.
Yeah. What's prohibited is mineral fiber and metal siding.
Right.
The kind of products that are going to deteriorate if impacted, for example. And I don't know that they're very actively used. There's also some laminated siding materials that, we want to prohibit except in certain areas because when they get wet, they tend to delaminate. And once again, the idea is to have something that even if neglected is not going to, get so bad that it becomes a nuisance case in front of the Building and Standards Commission.
In 2012, Cedar Park went to 75% masonry.
Once again, and to be honest with you, it was out of laziness. The idea was we're going to put a number out there and see where it goes. If you guys wanted us to do research on the numbers, we would be willing to make that comparison. Won't take very long to find out.
I think the principal thing to keep in mind here is the fact that if there's something that's wanting to be used as another alternate material, if it's of equal value or has the same ability to stand up to weather and stuff like that, it's just a matter of just getting a variance.
Right.
And you just go forward.
Well, and once again, let me put my architect's hat on. Building materials and their use change, constantly. It would not surprise me if in 4 years, you're amending this list because there's a new material that's just as good that isn't on it. There's also some materials that I'm showing my age that probably aren't ever going to be used again, but they, glazed structural clay tile. I'd be shocked if you ever had anybody propose using that, but it's an equal product, so it's on the list.
Mm-hmm. So how is the 65% calculated?
Everything below the top plate, okay, and there are exclusions for the area that can only be seen from the rear yard, okay, assuming that it's not a double frontage lot or within 50 feet of a public right-of-way or a golf course. Those are excluded, and it goes all the way to 24 inches within finished grade, i.e. that the massive unfinished concrete foundation walls will have to be treated within 24 inches of the ground.
Okay, so is that per surface? So
Per surface, except for the exclusions.
left and right, front, each one would have to have 65% of the required materials?
Except for the parts that are only visible from your rear yard, yours or somebody else's.
Well, I just wondered if I do like the whole front 100%.
Right, and I'll give
only
you,
have to go like 5 feet around the sides.
for
to get
example,
that.
if you did a recessed entry, okay, we would include that as being part of that front elevation, even though, the percentage allows you to change materials in that recess if you want to. It could be wood.
This still provides a lot of flexibility as far as.
Well, that was the idea, it's not, it wasn't to be rigid, it was
Right.
to be precise.
Yeah, precision was it.
Roy, I'm just wondering, have we discussed any of this with some of our builders here in the area? Have you had conversations with any of them about this?
We have made them aware that those provisions are coming.
Have you had any of them that have gone, oh my God, no, that won't work?
No, sir.
Okay.
Now, there's absolutely no doubt it will increase costs. But once again, is it the most significant aspect of cost? No, not even close. You know, at $100+ a square foot, okay, I promise you, reducing the size of a house, 100 square feet is way more significant than what you'll spend on the exterior.
But these things do make the exterior longer lasting.
Oh, absolutely.
And that also increases the resale value if you're going to sell the home down the road.
And eliminates the potential for nuisance value to the neighbors
There you
that
go.
are subjected to the lack of maintenance potentially. And it, the life cycle cost of the building, I promise you, it will more than pay for itself. But some people aren't worried about that. We'll admit, first cost is a huge issue for some people. But over the life of the building, it's much cheaper to use, materials that are highly durable.
I don't know, if I'm looking at building a house and let's say the required materials at 25% is only $10,000 of the cost, but now I'm looking at increasing it 160%. Now I'm looking at 26,000 as opposed to 10. That seems like a pretty sizable increase in the cost of my house.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not so sure what you're comparing it to, but
I'm just saying, if I'm starting with 25%
I understand, but
and I'm going to
that
65,
but
that's a
that-
160% increase.
that other percentage has some material on it. It's not naked. It's not raw studs. So what you're talking about is the increase between material X and material Y. And that's not going up 160% in most cases. There are less expensive materials. For example, the comparison of cost between, plaster and hardy plank when it's finished is nowhere near 160%. If you were to use that as the baseline comparison and that difference in percentage increase. And if you used,
You're right, I wasn't thinking about the difference. I was
well, I understand, and once again, here you go. If you reduce the cost of your flooring finish in the house $1.50 a square foot, you way more than exceeded that number. And which is more important to the public at large? How quick your carpet wears out, or how many times do you have to maintain the exterior of your building and don't do it? So,
well, thank you.
you bet.
Am I done asking questions? Are y'all done asking questions? All right, it's a public hearing. Public, it's open. Questions, comments? All right, we're going to leave this public hearing open at this time.
Yes.
We will pick this up at our next meeting. Before I move on, is anything else, just to make sure, council discussion? All right.
Ed,
We,
sorry.
yes,
I did have a question. Does that?
please,
Forgot.
you know the
I
rules.
forgot. Stephanie Smith, 20606 Braining Iron. Does the exterior include paint color?
No.
So you can still paint,
You can paint all
Fluorescent.
blue. You can paint the
Duke
brick if you
blue.
want.
yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Duke blue, yes. No,
I'm doing polka dots on my house. All right, number 3.
I was gonna say, I don't think we have a way of preventing
No.
that at all. No.
You cannot,
Can't officially stop someone from painting a color house,
you cannot regulate taste.
right?
Come by my house, I'll show you.
7 minutes.
3,
this one's fairly
the
simple.
Lago Vista, hold on, let me
sorry.
read it in. The Lago Vista City Council will hold a public hearing and discuss a potential amendment to Chapter 14 of the Lago Vista zoning ordinance prohibiting all forms of zoning and variance applications authorized by that chapter that are substantially the same as one that has been denied for at least 12 months from the date of the last form of denial.
There is a provision in your ordinance that's fairly, oops,
Hold on just a second.
you got to open the public
I'm going to
hearing.
open the public hearing at 7:36 PM.
I was told to go fast, I'm going too fast, I guess. You know, this one's fairly easy. You have an existing ordinance which is fairly prototypical to every zoning ordinance I've ever seen. The only difference is that in Lago Vista, the limitation of the, decisions or denials with prejudice apply only to zoning district changes. Typically, that applies to all forms of applications, and the theory behind it is you shouldn't obligate either the, the supporters or the opponents, of an application to show up each and every month, until they get worn out and stay home. That actually happened. A gentleman got denied, and rather than file an appeal with the Board of Adjustments, he chose to file the same application and showed up in front of P&Z. And as a result, I had to read the ordinance a little more carefully, and I said, surely this is denied, not allowed. And the answer is not quite. So we're making that correction. We will make a similar correction about subdivision applications, but that'll be in the subdivision ordinance when we rewrite that, which I don't know if what would you call where we are, Eric? We're sniffing a new subdivision ordinance. So.
Didn't we just have our subdivision ordinance redone?
It wasn't long ago. We're still not happy with it.
Questions, comments? I don't have any for this one.
Nope.
No, I'm good.
Pretty straightforward.
You have one? All right, public? This is a public hearing. Questions, comments? All right, we will leave this one open as well. And we will move on to agenda item number 4. The Lago Vista City Council will hold a public hearing and discuss a potential amendment to Chapter 14 of the Lago Vista zoning ordinance, adding definitions and/or modifying the provisions related to the various required yards and their locations. Now we'll open the public hearing at 7:38 p.m.
This one has come up on various occasions before, but we have always convinced the folks that own corner lots that we're turning the house where the front door is not where the address is into getting with 911 and changing it. We've also had complaints that there are a number of buildings around town where the front doors are not in the front yard and that they're on literally a side yard facing another building. And so we knew that was an issue that we needed to address eventually. What brought this into the priority category is a gentleman manipulated an application where he had a corner lot that was very narrow in one frontage and very long in the other frontage, and to fit the particular house he wanted to build, he was going to have to flip it or else it wasn't going to fit. And the front yard, if you will, that he was defining was going to be the side yard with basically a blank wall facing the public right-of-way, and his rear yard is only 5 feet deep. And we said, oh my goodness, you can't even fix this with the 911 addressing change, so we better get around to writing these definitions of what a front yard is. And that's basically what you have in front of you, is a fairly prototypical requirement that 911 will appreciate that says, what is going to be defined as your address and your front yard is going to be where the front door is, so that when they dispatch emergency vehicles, there's no opportunity for confusion. And then the rest of it is fairly much in line. The only thing that we kind of, and we covered this, and it's a little weak in your existing ordinance. One of the common things to do on corner lots is to have 2 different definitions of a corner lot and introduce the idea of what's called a reverse corner. And there's a number of different ways to refer to this, but basically what it's talking about is if you have a corner lot and what you're calling your side yard is immediately adjacent to somebody else's front yard, that you're going to be subject to the same requirements as a front yard. And that's sort of consistent with the idea.
Roy,
Yes, sir.
Come again? I've missed what you were saying.
If you have a corner lot and your front yard is your front yard and it has a 25-foot setback, our current ordinances allows the other side to be a 15-foot setback. But then when that abuts to somebody else's front yard that's facing on the other street, you now have two different, quote, quasi-public spaces, and you don't have the uniform green space that the ordinance typically anticipates. And you also have some issues with, you know, how close a garage might be to the public right-of-way and having adequate room to back out of your garage and still have good visibility. You know, and particularly in case of Lago Vista, you have a propensity for people to also want to put site obstructing fences all the way up to the maximum limit they can. So that can be problematic. I didn't write it this way originally, but I brought it in front of planning and zoning and brought up the idea of, you know, do you want to introduce the idea of a reverse corner lot? Is this an issue in Lago Vista? Because you've got a lot of what would be nonconformity out there. And I said, maybe we're worried about something that's a non-issue. And they very universally said, no, we think that's important and you ought to do it. But that's basically the only, what I might call option that's in there. There's a definition of a reverse corner. That wasn't in there until I added it because they asked me to. I wasn't familiar enough with the community to determine whether that was a necessity versus it's a common practice.
Does it just deal with the setback on that affected
The
side?
setback, and I'll give you an example. If you had two corner lots that were back to back, and they were two corner lots and no intervening lots, you know, facing the other street, and they both utilize this as a side yard, that's fine. It's 15 feet in that case. But if you have this at 15 and the next guy's at 25, that doesn't work.
Well, I can understand the separation and the setback, but now does it affect that fence? I mean, if
They would have to hold their fence back the additional 10 feet as well,
okay.
or make it non-site obstructing, i.e. wrought iron or something you can see through.
Okay.
And once again, that's fairly optional. I was torn, you know, but between whether it's important for Lago Vista or not.
I know,
Right.
I can understand. I've seen a house just recently that was built on a corner that you go around the corner.
Well, one of the
and it's
real
right on-
fears-
It is right on the street, basically.
Where it's really critical is where you have the real potential of people to widen the public right-of-way right up to the property line. That's when your setbacks get real important. And I got news for you. Everybody says, you know, but there's a lot of suburban-type communities that have in fact done that throughout the entire community.
Gotcha.
Gentlemen?
I have a question.
Sure.
Not really sure how to phrase this, but if you had a home that was built on a corner and the person ended up doing what you've just described, where they put the house in sideways, where the longer side faces a major street, and he builds a fence that is side obstructing, is there something to prohibit that from occurring right now?
Yes.
Oh, there is, okay.
In fact, that is probably the most frequent variance request that's been here since I have been, is people wanting to build fences where they're not currently allowed.
Okay, well, that was my question. Thank you.
Roy, how do you define a front door?
I'm sorry, the principal entry.
Okay, so if I just took a wall with windows and I just put a door on it, does that make it my front? If I never,
If that's the principal entry and that's what you want to define as that.
well, I go through my garage.
That's the one 911 is going to show up at, let me put it that way.
Okay.
They're not going to go to your garage. And that's the point.
So they could still flip the house. They could just put a door on there and say, this is my principal
Yep.
entrance. And
I would be careful about making sure that's the one they want to use as the emergency entry and exit. Because otherwise, you're defeating the purpose of an ordinance that's there for your own safety.
Well, as a professional firefighter, you can't get through most people's front door anyways.
I understand.
They all go through their garage.
The real issue is making sure that 911 knows where to try.
Yeah.
What you're really trying to avoid is somebody not being able to find it because you have a non-standard address and they pass it up because, this doesn't look like this house that we've been dispatched to. And that can often be critical for EMS particularly. Let me put it this way. We called ESD1 and got their input, and they said, absolutely, please do this before we wrote this ordinance this way. We were going to write it anyway, but that requirement was wholeheartedly supported by their staff.
So who determines the address side?
911. And you can change that, and we will require you to do that, but it wasn't in the ordinance. We told people, said, look, we'll give you a permit, but we're not giving you a CO unless you fix this. Now, we didn't really have an ordinance basis. We just flexed our muscles and said, please do this or else. But now it'll be in the ordinance. Now, and it says you're not getting a permit until you do that.
And it's through 911?
Yes.
Because the reason I asked, because I bought 15 acres, didn't have an address. I
Right.
went to the post office.
And we have some that are wrong.
I didn't go through the 911. I went to the post office for an address.
They probably contacted 911 because it's actually, I think Austin does that for the entirety of Travis County, but it's 911 addressing that does that. And the fact that the post office did that for you, but they're in charge of that.
And Mr. Mayor, when you're ready to build your house, you will go through 911.
Oh, I got an address now.
Okay.
I got an address. 911 has conformed to me.
Hey,
But they're the ones that we coordinate those addresses with. When we find one that's incorrect, and we do, I mean, you'll see places in Lago Vista that it's 9110 right next to 9110. And we go, oops, time to call 911. And Chris Martinez is the one that does that for us. He deals with them routinely.
you the man.
Gentlemen? All right, public? It's open. All right, we shall leave this one open. And we are on number 5, correct?
Mm-hmm.
We now move into action items. Number 5, the Lago Vista City Council will discuss and consider possible action on ordinance number 19-01-03-01, an ordinance of the City Council of Lago Vista, Texas, amending various sections of Chapter 3, amending various sections of Article 4.800 of Chapter 4, and amending Article 9.800 and Article 9.1900 of Chapter 9, all of the Lago Vista Code of Ordinances to change the name of the current building committee and to transfer to them certain specific duties and authority previously assigned to the Board of Adjustment and providing for related matters.
Mayor, this is also Roy's item, so as he's walking up, I just want to mention a couple of things. This is the second hearing for this item. I did hand out a copy of the memo from our legal team, the hard copy. This was sent out to you via email. This shows, it answers a couple of questions from the previous meeting. One of the questions presented by council was, can the council create this ordinance and pick and choose which items that, which powers, which authorities can be granted to the Building Standards Committee. You'll see in this memo from our city attorney that based on the language used, you can choose which powers to give to any of these committees. This, in fact, uses the word may, so therefore you have that opportunity to keep powers or to relegate those to Building Standards.
Yeah, the background of this is, as I alluded to before in talking about, appeals and variances from Chapter 3 requirements, was that currently the Board of Adjustment serves as the appellate body and body that grants variances for both Chapter 14 and Chapter 3. it was brought up by the Charter Review Committee that it might be more appropriate, since we have a building committee and people that are, vested, if you will, with the expertise about building materials and safety issues related to building, that it might be more appropriate for them to serve that role. Unfortunately, that required a charter amendment that this council reviewed, and it went up for the ballot, and that was passed. And once again, the gist of that portion of the ordinance deals with simply transferring the Chapter 3 appellate and variance authority from the Board of Adjustment to what it was called the Building Committee. The other thing it did was clean up. In fact, one of the things I wasn't aware of, there was a portion of the ordinance where it was called the Building and Safety Committee instead of the Building Committee. The other thing we did was we went back and changed the name, made it uniform, Building and Standards Commission, and in fact made the changes to those two sections of Chapter 9 to reiterate two things, basically. One is that there are rules of procedures now that are in place, and they don't have the option of adopting their own. And the other one has to do with the term limits that we've kind of ignored, and to make sure that language is unambiguous, and everybody gets nominated to a certain term, but you can be reappointed, if you will, infinitely, if you will. And that those problems still exist in some of the other committee portions of Chapter 9, and as soon as we get our slick new Muni Code software, we'll attack those. But we wanted to wait until it was a little easier on us to do those. But we'll make those changes in those other chapters. And in fact, Chapter 9 mentions a couple of committees that don't exist and haven't existed for a long time, and we'll clean that up as well. I'll defer to Aaron. We okay with everything?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion.
All right.
I move that we approve ordinance number 19-01-03-01.
I'll second the motion.
All right, I have a motion and a second by Dick. Any further discussion? I do have a couple questions. 54.032, subject to quasi-judicial enforcement. Subchapter applies to these ordinances. What powers is this? Can you just explain these powers?
In regards to the unsafe and buildings?
Like animal care and control.
Okay.
What are we doing, what are we giving BSC?
I didn't think they had any authority there, but I may be wrong.
It says number 6, relating. Okay, so 54.032, ordinances subject to quasi-judicial enforcement. This subchapter applies only to ordinances, and it's 1 through 7. Number 6 says relating to animal care and control.
I think I know where he's headed. This section having to do with animal control. There's some other provisions in 54 that deal with environmental regulations. And at the last meeting, we discussed this very briefly. Who will handle that quasi-judicial work? Won't be building its standards, it'll be the municipal court.
Right.
With our code enforcement folks enforcing.
So he's talking about the state regulation now?
Yeah, the state, yeah, that was his question.
Okay, I thought he was talking about a local ordinance.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was lost. I was thinking.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
We just didn't adopt those.
We left it as is.
Yeah.
We did not transfer any of the authority from the city council.
Okay.
And that was very intentional. That's what we discussed last time, is we weren't all that comfortable with that because of I liken it to an unfunded mandate from the state. You have other people dictating how you spend your money, and that's supposed to be your job.
Right.
You really, I'm not comfortable with delegating that necessarily.
Okay, well, I don't know, I guess I'm still confused. Page 3, enforcement authority.
We didn't adopt all of the provisions of Chapter 54 that the state says you may give this authority to your Building and Standards Commission.
But
And
are we adopting this one here?
No. Only thing we really did was, other than what we talked about transferring from the Board of Adjustment to the Building Committee, there's no other substantive changes to authority. We simply changed the name.
Mr. Mayor, the document that you're looking at is simply provided for you as guidance so that you understand what the law says, so that in the particular instance that we're facing now, the city of Lago Vista hasn't utilized every single power under this to delegate each of these items to the Building and Standards Commission or to some other quasi-judicial body.
Okay.
You have the authority to do it, so it's just a background document for you. It's not
Well, I
part of
thought
the
we were only
ordinance.
looking at .033, but then I see 032 all spelled out here, and I'm like, when did
Yeah,
this
but
come
those
up?
are state regulations, and once again, those are things that you could give them the authority to do, but we did not. In fact, like I said, the only substantive change is that the Building and Standards Commission will now hear appeals and variances to Chapter 3, whereas they did not before. The Board of Adjustment did that.
Okay, I understand.
A couple of us have researched others' building and standards, and ours is pretty typical of what other cities have given their building standards commission.
There was one sentence that wasn't familiar to me, but the rest of it I'd seen a million times. And we didn't change it. And it is the way most people do it.
Yeah.
And the reason is simply because, you guys are in charge of the budget.
Right.
This has budget ramifications.
Okay.
Got it. Understand now. Anything else? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Hearing none, motion carries unanimous. Consent agenda. All matters listed under consent agenda are to be considered routine by the city council and will be enacted by one motion. There will not be separate discussion on these items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Number 6, approval of the December 6, 2018 council meeting minutes. And number 7, the city manager reports.
Is the city manager's report part of the consent agenda?
It's listed under consent agenda. Okay,
I didn't think we had to give him consent to
Move
report.
approval of the consent agenda except for the city manager's report.
now that I see this, I remember we had this issue last meeting, did we not?
Something.
7 should be under something else than consent agenda. All right, so we're looking at only number 6, approval of the December 6, 2018 council meeting minutes.
You have a motion and I'll second. You made the motion.
Who made the motion?
Didn't you make the motion?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so Frank made the motion, Dick made the second. All right, I have a motion and second. Any further discussion?
Yes, sir. I think in the future, when we have motions and seconds, that you should wait to get the mayor to acknowledge you. Otherwise, we get into these situations where we're looking around when, what do we do next?
I apologize.
Thank you. And I didn't hear Frank's motion, so. Okay, anything else? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, minutes have been approved. All right, now, number 7, city manager report.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have 3 reports. First report is we are updating the city website. There are some things you'll see, some sections that are getting new information. One of the things you'll see is the new appointments are being updated for committees and boards, so you'll have those names updated. Those letters have been sent out for everyone. That's one of the things that the staff does, is we send out letters that let people know they've been selected or not been selected for a board that they put in for. One of the items on the website that's being updated, the charter has been posted on the website. We do have an official copy attested by the mayor now at City Hall, one at the library, and all department heads have their copies. Council has a copy. Anyone that wants to review the charter can do so online, or they can come into City Hall or the library, and we'll give them a copy to review or give them a copy. The last thing is we tossed this idea out to potentially move our executive session for council meetings to occur before our 6:30 meeting time. We've sent this out to council just individually, get some feedback. If no concerns are there, we'd like to try experiment with this at the next January meeting, which is the 17th. So what we would do is we would schedule the executive session to begin at 5 o'clock, and then the regular meeting would still begin at 6:30. Typically, that could provide an excess of 30 minutes or an hour before the regular meeting, but this will allow us to move the regular agenda around so that when we get to action items from the executive session, council will be able to help take those actions in the regular meeting at the end while people are still here instead of convening back into executive session. So we'll follow up again just to check with each of you to make sure there's no issue, Mayor, but if that's good, we'll advertise accordingly for the January 17th meeting.
I like that idea because a lot of it, because we are now streaming, coming out of executive session as it is now, streaming is off. If we do it prior to the meetings, when we come back, if we have something to discuss, it will be live and also streamed.
I think that's a huge benefit.
And they'll be able to see us adjourn.
Yeah. Closure.
Close it.
So yeah, and Mayor, so if we try that out, and if the council determines that it just doesn't work, then we have the ability to simply flex back to the current schedule. We just need to advertise accordingly when Sandra posts the agendas so that people have plenty of notice to know that you'll be here conducting executive business. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Future meetings, consider schedule and items for future council meetings. I have a question, Roy, that may lead into a future council meeting. Address numbers on houses. Is that our code or is that part of fire code? Is that a 911 issue?
It is a universal thing. We added it to our definition to say you've got to have numbers that are visible on the buildings. What we added, what we didn't address very adequately is that when you have an address that has multiple buildings, like a multifamily with apartment buildings that has building numbers, or in our case, you'll very often have two duplexes on one lot. The idea that you're going to have to put building numbers on there that are visible from the right-of-ways and be visible at night.
And we have those enforcement abilities.
You're right. And of course, we added the language subject to the dark sky requirements as well when we made that comment.
Never mind, no more future meeting. That answers my question.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. We have nothing new? Nobody wants to discuss anything in the future? Hey, we're never having a council meeting.
Something will surely turn up.
Yeah.
Do we have anything? Let me see. My screen has gone away. What do we have already scheduled for future meetings? Liaison reports, landscaping, planning and zoning.
I'm sure
building
we'll have
committee.
some economic development committee updates.
All right.
At the next meeting.
Executive session. Number 9, convene into a closed executive session pursuant to sections 551.071, advice of counsel, 551.072, real property, 551.074, personnel, section 551.087, economic development, Texas Government Code, and section 1.05, Texas disciplinary rules of professional conduct regarding a consultation with legal counsel concerning any regular meeting agenda item requiring confidential attorney-client advice necessitated by the deliberation or discussion of said item as needed. B, consultation with legal counsel and deliberating the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property if deliberation in an open meeting would have a detrimental effect on the position of the city in negotiations with a third person, including but not limited to a legal issue regarding dispute and a settlement agreement with DAPB Incorporated and David Boutros relating to the void sale of the Highland Lakes Golf Course and legal issues regarding an amended contract for sale of the Highland Lakes Golf Course to Ezekiel Choi, including an access and lease agreement to make improvements. C, consultation with legal counsel regarding contractual claims or possible claims or charges, contractual modifications, and questions related thereto. Consultation with legal counsel regarding the creation of the Building Standards Commission. Consultation with legal counsel concerning DAPB request. We will convene at 8:06 p.m. We have 24 minutes.
We need 24 minutes.
I said we'll be out of here at 8:30.
Oh.
All right, Parkinson's Law.
Hey, Mayor,
Yes.
we're gonna go into this one.
This one?
I'm gonna grab a back there.
Would have definitely made it had I not asked so many questions.
We talked to, I talked to.
Yeah. Building materials.
Yeah, but,
You know, you got some guys.
Kent's a POA.
I said, and I was interested.
I do like that.
Oh, you read me right. I hope I wasn't too late
As
to
far
talk
as,
about it. You know, familiarity with
that
what
would
you
be
just
something
read
that's
is
a
critical.
POA
See, I'll give you an
and deed
example.
restriction. Yeah.
When we used to dispatch from our